is ruled by the forces of nature. Fire and ice, wind and water. Elemental forces that bring death as well as life. They can wreak destruction on an epic scale. These are the forces of nature's rage. Fertile plains of the American Midwest. Beautiful, tranquil. This is the heartland of a continent. But every spring and summer, this tranquility is destroyed. With no warning, the skies darken and boil, spawning fierce thunderstorms and unleashing the most powerful winds on Earth. Tornadoes can touch down anywhere, in every state, and in dozens of countries around the world. But here in the Midwest, they strike with frightening regularity. That's why this region is known as Tornado Alley.
Anyone in the sound of my voice, there is a tornado on the ground. Please take cover.
Most people flee tornadoes, but there are some who actually stalk them. In Norman, Oklahoma, at the National Severe Storms Laboratory, the scientists of Project Vortex are investigating the mysterious alchemy that triggers tornadoes.
Now, teams, do you have an escape off of that in case the storm moves off to the east?
They're deploying portable Doppler radar to track the complex winds that spawn twisters. It's a powerful tool in the fight to save lives, the struggle to predict when and where tornadoes will strike.
It's amazing how little is known fundamentally about how tornadoes form. And so what we're trying to do is to advance the warning time, cut back on the false alarm rate. We feel that if we can give people 20 minutes to 30 minutes lead time, then people can take the proper precautions.
The Vortex team must take precautions themselves. Their equipment is sophisticated, but it's delicate.
There's some fairly heavy precipitation back there. There may be some hail. If there is hail, we don't know how large it is, and we don't want large hail to hit the antenna.
With a severe thunderstorm approaching and hail on the horizon, the situation could get very bad, very fast.
We have to go. We have to go right now. Follow us.
The time has come to find a safer vantage point. A tornado may be on its way. Hail provides an early warning, and it's already beginning to fall. When ordinary raindrops are lifted high by strong updrafts, they can freeze into balls of ice the size of a grapefruit before plunging to earth in a deafening barrage. For some, it's just a novelty, a bizarre snowstorm in midsummer. But with each projectile weighing up to a pound and falling at a speed of 90 miles per hour, a hailstorm can be a disaster. By itself, hail would be destructive enough. That's a familiar fact of life here in Tornado Alley. And when a twister approaches, there's only one means of defense: get out of its way. At Wakita Elementary School in Oklahoma, the normal routine is broken by a tornado drill. When the siren sounds, men, women, and children head underground. There's no predicting a twister's path, so a storm cellar is the safest escape. Since tornadoes rarely last more than a few minutes, a shelter doesn't need much in the way of equipment or supplies. But as the Crockett family of McLean, Texas discovered, a storm cellar can be the key to survival.
We latched the door and then I held on to the door. It tried to pick the door up, and then they blew the house away.
We heard glass breaking and extreme winds. We were just praying.
You couldn't breathe, and it just, the pressure, it was like your eardrums are gonna blow up. I didn't think we were gonna make it.
The Crocketts escaped with their lives, but not much else.
It's not so much the house, but the little keepsakes that you've had for years, you know, family heirlooms and things that are gone. It's hard. Well, I haven't thought of moving. I want to build right back here. This is home. We've been here all our life, and this is where our children were raised.
Tornadoes can strike anytime, but late spring and early summer are high season. That's when Tornado Alley becomes the ideal breeding ground for severe weather. It's spawned by the collision of opposites. Dry, cool air blowing in from the west meets warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico. The warm air is lifted to form a giant thunderstorm called a supercell. In the lower part of the storm, fast winds meet slower winds, creating a spinning tube of air that'll give the twister its twist. If the tube is lifted by a warm updraft, the funnel goes vertical, and a tornado is born. These days, tornadoes are often spotted as soon as they form. But in the past, they struck with no warning at all. The giant cyclone that swept through downtown Waco, Texas in 1953 killed 114 people. The Great Dallas Tornado of 1957. This was the first one to be extensively filmed. As often as these killers have struck, few people have ever gotten a really close look at one and survived. Incredibly, one man found himself inside a tornado funnel and lived to tell about it. He was Roy Hall. His widow vividly recalls that day in May 1948.
It was a windy, windy day all day long. It kept getting darker and darker. My husband said, there has to be a tornado. He stayed out on the lawn with his camera, and suddenly big hail the size of grapefruit started falling. He came on through the house. He was going to the back room where we were, and it knocked him down. He was lying on his back. Suddenly, the house was gone, and he looked up right into the eye of the tornado.
Hall's vision comes alive in his own words.
Something had billowed down from above. It was the lower end of the funnel. I was looking at its inside. The funnel extended upward for over 1,000 feet, swaying, bending. It seemed to be partly filled with a bright cloud which shimmered like a fluorescent light.
Roy Hall's family counted themselves lucky to survive an encounter they never sought. But across Tornado Alley, there are many who would love the chance to see what Roy Hall saw.
Tornado on the ground.
Tornado on the ground. Confirmed on the tornado. Right, tornado for sure. It's beautiful, gorgeous tornado.
Storm chasers like Tim Marshall are after more than thrills. They bring back hundreds of hours of video, crucial clues to understanding killer cyclones. Tim and his partner will continue this pursuit well into the night. At the edge of a small town, the men hear a chilling sound. It's the familiar wail of a tornado siren. their quarry may have found them. The storm chasers escaped that night, but many others were not so lucky. A direct hit from a twister can make buildings literally explode. With debris hurling through the air at 200 miles an hour, a cyclone becomes a death wind. While no lives were lost to the whirlwinds in Kansas that night, the little town of Gerald, Texas, would not get off so easily. Viewed from outer space, the storm that spawned the killer was a monster. From a snaking funnel, it grew into a giant. Tornadoes are classified by wind speed and destructive power. The one that hit Gerald was near the top of the scale, an F5, with winds over 260 miles per hour. In some parts of town, devastation was total. Many residents had a few minutes advance warning, but nowhere to go. Their houses were built on concrete slabs with no storm cellars. The wind simply wiped their homes off the face of the earth. Those who survived the fury of the storm will never forget it.
Sounded like the freight train, just like they said. All we saw was a big black cloud twirling, and there was a lot of debris, but it was like we were on the outskirts of it. Definitely very lucky to be alive. When we were in the closet, I got scared. But when I really was scared is when I went down and saw the devastation it left behind. I've never seen anything so devastating in my life.
The Red Cross rushed to provide food and comfort for the homeless. For many, the shelter's most important feature was this bulletin board. Often the only way to contact loved ones or find out if they were still alive. Some survivors would have to wait days before their questions were answered, as rescue workers sorted through the wreckage. The final death toll at Gerald was 27. It was the nation's most lethal tornado of the year. To compound the tragedy, this was the second time in less than a decade that Gerald was flattened by a twister. And it's certain that more are on the way. It's just part of life in Tornado Alley. Tornadoes are bad enough, but there's another hazard that can descend from a thunderstorm. And it's even more deadly. Lightning. It terrifies and fascinates us. It's one of nature's most spectacular phenomena, and one of its least understood. But one thing we do know, when lightning strikes, the results can be catastrophic.
It felt like I stuck my hand in a wall socket and just kept it there instead of pulling it back.
Yeah, I looked around and I seen my friend. He was laying about 15 feet from where we started. I could tell he was dead.
All I remember was like a funnel of water, bright, light water, being funneled into my body with such force.
Most of us try desperately to avoid lightning, but there are a few who actually seek it out. Warren Fadley is a photographer based in Tucson, Arizona, who specializes in shooting severe weather. One of his favorite subjects is lightning.
The most commonly asked question is, why do I do this? It encompasses so many of the things I enjoy. It's adventurous, it's a challenge photographically, there's some element of danger. It's you against the storm to get the right picture at the right time. It's something that's irresistible.
Sometimes even Warren needs a little extra help in locating his quarry. Luckily, his home base, Tucson, is also the home of the National Lightning Detection Network. When lightning strikes, sensors across the country flash the news to computers here within seconds. The resulting display is like a CAT scan of the nation's thunderstorms. Tracking lightning as it strikes is helping researchers unravel the mysteries behind this spectacular phenomenon. For there's much more to lightning than meets the eye. During a thunderstorm, opposite electrical charges build up in a cloud and on the ground below. To release the cloud's negative charge, an electrical surge cuts a channel through the air. Near the ground, it draws positive charges from the tallest objects. When the circuit is complete, a bright bolt leaps upward. More strokes move up and down the same path, but it all happens so fast our eyes see only a single bright flash. That flash can be 10 miles long and cook the air along its narrow channel to 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit, 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun. Around the world, lightning splits the skies 100 times every second, and each year, thousands of people are blasted by a bolt. The prime candidates walk around in wide open spaces, wear spikes on their shoes, and swing metal sticks through the air. Golfers. They provide the perfect path for a lightning bolt's journey from cloud to ground. One victim is Gary Shaw.
We teed off on the first hole, and away we went, and it was nice. By the second and third holes, it started to sprinkle a little bit, and then it started to get nice again, so we just kept on going. The time we got to the 5th hole, it just poured. So we just ran. So we ran to the tree. My buddy said, you know, this is not the best place to be standing. We shouldn't be standing here. And that was the last thing I remembered. The lightning hit the tree, and a splash effect from the tree to us. And in my head, the top of my head, and went through my body and exited through my golf spikes. My friend, just by looking at him, I could tell he was dead.
In the United States alone, lightning kills about 100 people every year. But twice that number are struck and survive. And lightning can even hit people who think they're safe indoors.
When I hear a thunderstorm now, I'm very apprehensive. I close the doors of the house and pull the blinds, and I feel safer, but not safe.
Steve Marshburn Sr. was working inside a bank, but walls and windows couldn't stop the bolt.
It was a sunny day, beautiful day, and I was at work. I was standing at the drive-up window. A bolt of lightning struck the window, came in the speaker, hit me in the spine. Immediately, I began having severe headaches, memory problems, and this went on for 15 years in my case.
Lightning survivors carry a record of the trauma within their bodies for the rest of their lives. But there are people who actually try to summon lightning from the sky.
We are armed, we are ready. On my mark, we will fire. -7, -7.5. 3, 2, 1, and fire. We got it, all right. Good shot.
At a National Guard base near Gainesville, Florida, a test facility is designed to trigger artificial lightning strikes. Instead of waiting for a natural lightning bolt to strike, the engineers here can lure a bolt down from a thunderstorm, measuring its force and studying the results. Their technique? A modern version of Ben Franklin's kite. A rocket trailing a wire is fired at a thundercloud. Near the cloud, it can jump-start a bolt, completing a multi-million-watt circuit between Earth and sky.
-6 and I'm armed. Videos are on. Going to fire. And on my mark. 3, 2, 1, fire. triggers. We got it all. Range control. This is the lightning site. We have a confirmed fire at 12:42:25.
Of course, there's no shortage of natural lightning strikes. And in sandy soil, they often leave a calling card, fusing the grains of silicon into a strange sheath of glass called a fulgurite. It's like frozen lightning, preserving the zigzag pattern of a bolt as it makes its way from sky to ground. Another incredible manifestation happens far above the Earth and lasts for a mere instant. Scientists only recently confirmed the existence of exotic varieties of lightning that flash upward from thunderstorms high into the atmosphere. As colorful as they are fleeting, they've been dubbed blue jets and red sprites. Most of us will never witness these exotic forms of lightning, but even the everyday variety can produce an awesome display. Photographer Warren Fadley has perfected the art of catching a bolt from the blue.
What I'm able to do is to freeze that moment in time. Perfect. You're capturing something that's so powerful and brilliant and elusive. And it's almost like hunting. There's the lightning bolts on the film are the trophies. But the greatest reward with shooting lightning is you've captured something that would have otherwise been lost forever.
A bolt of lightning flashing randomly from the sky has a subterranean counterpart, the sinkhole, a sudden collapse of the earth that can swallow streets and houses with no apparent rhyme or reason. Sinkholes are created by water. When heavy rain or underground streams percolate through layers of limestone, the bedrock can dissolve, and the stage is set for a disaster. If the fragile crust breaks through, the results can resemble a bomb crater. From Japan to Ukraine to the United States, sinkholes can happen anywhere the ground is porous or water is on the move. They're just another reminder that our world is not as stable or as predictable as we'd like to think. But sinkholes pale in comparison to the most cataclysmic natural disasters of all. It looks like a normal day in Los Angeles, if any day can be called normal in this city of dreams. But today is different. The dream is about to become a nightmare. No, the big one hasn't hit Los Angeles. Not yet. This was just an illusion, an amusement park ride. At Universal Studios in Hollywood, a major quake happens like clockwork, 100 times every day. But this is earthquake country. In fact, the building that houses the simulation is designed to withstand the real thing. And a real quake follows no schedule and strikes with no warning. Throughout history, devastating earthquakes have come again and again, and their greatest fury has been felt in some of the world's greatest cities. In 1906, the boomtown of San Francisco was leveled by a massive tremor. Much of what was left standing after the quake was consumed in the fires that followed. 17 years later, an even stronger shock flattened Tokyo. Once again, fires broke out in the ravaged city, and they were responsible for most of the 100,000 deaths. Anchorage, Alaska, Good Friday, 1964. The greatest tremor ever recorded in North America. It measured 8.4 on the Richter scale of earthquake intensity. Tangshan, China. In 1976, more than 250,000 were killed here in the deadliest quake in modern times. When the earth trembles, it leaves ruin and tragedy in its wake. Often the same places are struck again and again, as the people of San Francisco discovered in 1989. The causes are built into the structure of our planet. The Earth's crust is like a cracked eggshell, composed of nearly 24 plates floating on top of a molten core. The plates continually grind against each other. Sometimes the edges snag, causing pressure to build up. When a snag gives way, it can release massive amounts of energy. This is an earthquake. And this is what it can do. In January 1994, California was rocked yet again. When the Northridge quake struck Los Angeles, parts of the city were shattered in seconds. Lives were shattered too. Homes were destroyed, loved ones missing or buried in the ruins. Fortunately, Los Angeles had prepared for the worst. An elite team sprang into action, a special unit of the LA County Fire Department called USAR, Urban Search and Rescue. Their mission is to locate and liberate trapped victims. Their secret weapon is training. USAR trainees hone their skills on an urban obstacle course, a simulation of the challenges left by a major earthquake. Locating victims trapped under collapsed buildings requires special skills and high-tech tools like SearchCam. This tiny video camera can be snaked into a narrow crevice, allowing rescuers to size up the situation.
I got a visual. Right now I got a female in her late 20s in a supine position.
Can you hear me? You can hear me? Tap 5 times.
One of the most effective tools in urban search and rescue has 4 legs and fur. Dogs can cover large areas quickly, sniffing out victims faster than humans or machines. From Northridge to Mexico City to the Oklahoma City bombing, dogs help save lives in urban disasters.
Hello? Are you okay?
But for all the training, the true test for the USAR team comes when they face the real thing. When the Northridge quake hit Los Angeles in 1994, a man named Salvador Pena was trapped inside a collapsed parking garage for more than 8 hours, while the USAR team struggled to free him.
The thing that concerned me right away was the safety hazards, the overhead hazards, the pillars of concrete that were unsupported and injure firefighters.
We tried to fortify the area that we were working with to get Salvador out. I was concerned whether or not we were going to be able to get out ourselves or if we were going to get trapped. We were directly underneath the same rumble pile that he was. We crossed our fingers and hoped that that would be enough to outlast the aftershock.
While the ground continued to rumble with aftershocks, the USAR team worked at the wreckage.
The thing you're most concerned about in a small space when the aftershock hits is that small space still going to stay the same size. And, you know, you're really quite concerned that everything's going to tumble in around you.
At last, Salvador Pena was free.
To see him go to the hospital still alive after all of that was tremendous, because the probability of him surviving was very, very slim.
Pena would recover from his injuries, but USAR's work was far from over.
Within the next hour, we transitioned to the Northridge Meadows apartments, which were probably about a half a mile to a mile away. The outcome was very much different. All of the people that were alive had been rescued before our arrival there, and we had the grim task of body recovery at that point. Even though we can't help that victim, we're helping the family and the survivors to reach some kind of closure.
16 died in the Northridge Meadows apartments, the greatest single loss of life in the '94 quake. The death toll, like the earthquake itself, could have been a lot worse. Most experts agree that this state is overdue for a massive earthquake. After all, the region is perched atop a spider's web of fault lines, including the huge San Andreas. When it hits this city of 11 million, the quake could produce thousands of collapsed structures and trapped victims. Emergency services would quickly be overwhelmed. That's what happened in Kobe, Japan, on January 17, 1995. A year to the day after Northridge, Kobe was rocked by a quake that hit 7.2 on the Richter scale. The shock lasted only 20 seconds, but it left this city of 1.5 million in chaos. Hardest hit were residential neighborhoods built without adequate reinforcement. Hundreds of people were buried in the rubble. The main elevated highway linking Kobe and Osaka was destroyed. Huge sections buckled. One bus driver found himself staring death in the face. Yoshio Fukumoto had driven the same route for years, but that morning his routine was shattered.
I understood immediately that it was an earthquake. At first, the bus started shaking side to side. Then the road itself started waving. The only thing I could do was to keep pushing down the brake pedal. At the instant that the bus finally stopped, the road ahead of us went down.
Fortunately, at that early hour, there were only 3 passengers on his bus. Had it been carrying more weight, it might not have stopped in time. It's a chilling reminder that in an earthquake, the distance between life and death is measured in inches. Elsewhere in the city, fires raged out of control. In the end, it would be one of the worst earthquakes ever to hit a modern city, and the most expensive natural disaster in history. Nearly 5,000 died in Kobe. 250,000 buildings were destroyed or damaged. Just cleaning up the rubble would take years. The Japanese have invested heavily in the tools and technology of earthquake preparedness, but that didn't stop disaster from leveling Kobe. And while Japan and California are at least braced for the inevitable, most of the world's greatest cities remain totally unprepared, and many are at risk. Few realize that even New York sits atop not one, but several fault lines. With its densely packed towers of steel and glass and its aging infrastructure, even a moderate quake here could produce a disaster of unprecedented proportions. We can only speculate on what might happen. Transportation, communications, and emergency services all would grind to a halt. Casualties would mount as the city's ability to care for them vanished. As bridges, tunnels, and highways collapse, Manhattan would be cut off from the rest of the world. The World Trade Center towers and much of the downtown financial district would collapse and burn as porous landfill turned to quicksand. The death toll would be staggering, the cost incalculable. New York City, as a financial, cultural, and population center, could cease to exist. There's smoke and fires everywhere. The city's devastated. There will be another great earthquake in Los Angeles, Tokyo, or somewhere else. No one can predict exactly when or where. And there will be no warning. Yet, even for a disaster that can be predicted, the trick is forecasting its path and its target. Case in point, Labor Day weekend, the Atlantic coastline of North America, and a howling tropical storm by the name of Fran. Pope Air Force Base outside Fayetteville, North Carolina, an elite strike team prepares to go to battle.
The last crew got cleared direct.
Their adversary, the deadliest weather on Earth, a hurricane. When, where, and how hard will Fran strike? To answer those life or death questions, these men, the hurricane hunters, must fly straight into the eye of a giant. Their mission is as risky as they come. Plunge a 30-year-old warplane head-on into winds that can top 200 miles an hour to measure with scientific precision a full-scale Atlantic hurricane.
September 1938. The eastern seaboard is lashed by a tropical hurricane. For 2 days, the coast from New Jersey to New England felt its full fury. New York was...
They strike with terrifying frequency, but in a random pattern no man or machine can ever predict. Each storm has a brutal personality all its own. We even give them names: Hugo, Camille, Andrew, Fran. 1 billion people live in their path, in a belt that circles the globe from Asia to Africa to the Americas. The storms Americans know as hurricanes go by other names elsewhere. Tempests of the Indian Ocean are called cyclones. Time and again, they've ravaged India, Bangladesh, and their neighbors. One such cyclone in 1970 left over 150,000 dead. In the Western Pacific, they're typhoons. When Typhoon Angela bore down on the Philippines in 1995, over 1 million people abandoned their homes and fled for their lives. Cyclone, typhoon, or hurricane. By any name, tropical storms are natural-born killers, all spawned by the same unassuming conditions. An Atlantic hurricane begins as a tropical depression off the coast of Africa. As trade winds carry the infant storm west across the ocean, it's fueled by warm seas. By the end of the journey, it's swollen into a raging whirlwind 300 miles across. Hurricanes are rated on a scale of 1 to 5. Packing winds of over 150 miles an hour, a Category 4 or 5 storm can hit land with the force of an atom bomb. Hurricane Andrew did just that. When it slammed into the Florida coast in August of 1992, Andrew exacted a terrible toll. In the end, the storm left behind 61 dead and some $30 billion in devastation. America's efforts to fight these monster storms begin here at the National Hurricane Center in Miami, Florida.
Our aviation, no gas, so here I am.
The job of the Hurricane Center is to peer into the future, to turn mountains of meteorological data into a life-saving weather forecast.
34 knots, 150, 120.
It's a hair-trigger business. Make the call too soon, and a last-minute change in course could have disastrous consequences. Too late, and those in harm's way will have no time to escape. With Hurricane Fran bearing down on the coast, media pressure builds for the center to name the storm's target.
If it makes a direct hit, the damage could be substantial, but
exactly where Fran will strike is impossible to predict until the team in the air have probed the eye of the storm.
And winds are building now. They're about 95.
200 miles from land, the hunters close in on Fran. What the forecasters in Florida study from afar, the hurricane hunters will confront eye to eye.
It's like going up on the roller coaster on the big hill and you're getting ready to go down. The roller coaster goes very slowly and all of a sudden you know it's coming, and a lot of times the plane will drop sometimes as much as 2,000 feet, and you get quite a ride.
It's the roughest quadrant usually.
The ride only gets rougher. Fighting winds of over 100 miles an hour, the aging plane takes a beating.
That was a little hello from Fran. Course still looks pretty good on ours. Okay.
The hurricane hunter's goal looms just ahead, the very heart of the whirlwind.
Now we're coming into an area that's kind of in between the rings of the storm. 5 miles.
To forecast Fran's path, they must pinpoint the whirlwind's exact center. Satellites and radar can't make the call. Only on-the-spot readings will do. The ultimate weapon in this battle is called a drop wind sound. By ejecting this instrument package into the eye, they can lock in on the location and conditions at the heart of the storm. Computerized images show what the camera cannot. The plane plunging into the worst winds of the eye wall.
Just about to punch into the eye wall. Heading out northeast.
The pressure drops. The winds subside. The hunters have penetrated the eye.
Definitely inside now.
The calm air of the eye is ringed by banks of wind-driven clouds and rain, a spectacular vista known as the stadium effect.
I'm going to go ahead and load up now. You ready, drop? Pilot weather, come right, 15.
After 4 harrowing passes through the eye, the team has the data they need. At last, the forecasters back in Miami can pin down Fran's target. Ground Zero, Wilmington, North Carolina. For the second time in less than 3 months, this strip of the Atlantic coast prepares for the worst. At least they have experience on their side. Sometimes the monsters of the Atlantic choose more unexpected targets. In January of 1990, a late-season hurricane stormed into southern England. 110-mile-an-hour winds left 39 people dead. It was the second time in 4 years that England had seen such a storm. Once again, the British were completely at the mercy of the gale. But even in the U.S., all the warning in the world can't stop the havoc. Gran hits home packing winds of nearly 120 miles an hour.
Isolated portions of those are possible over the course of the North.
Phenomenon that can race across hundreds of miles in just minutes. A mountain of water. Tsunami. On November the 29th, 1975, one such killer wave visited the island of Hawaii.
Well, there was 2 earthquakes, and the first earthquake early that morning woke us up.
17-year-old Mike Stearns and his fellow Boy Scouts were camping near the beach of Halape.
We just gotten back into our bedding and trying to get back to sleep when the real big earthquake came that created the tsunami. And it was a moonless night, and so we were over there trying to untie our shoes that were tied up from the rafters. That's when somebody said, "Look," and because we were facing away from the ocean, and we saw the water, white water, just come right up to the shelter. We didn't know no tsunami was coming.
Within seconds, the ocean surged up 40 feet. Mike and his friends were swallowed by the wave.
It just felt like a wall just hitting me. I must have became unconscious. The only thing going through my mind was, I want to die fast. I want to die fast. I thought this was it.
Life or death was a question of fate.
So I just started calling for my friends. I didn't know who survived.
When the waters receded, 2 people were dead. One, a leader of Mike's scout troop. For survivors of the giant waves, the shore may never feel safe again. Dr. Walter Dudley of the University of Hawaii has made the study of ocean waters his life's work.
These waves we see moving across the water here are waves that are generated by the wind, but they're really only on the surface. Tsunami waves are different than the waves that move across the surface that are created by the wind because they're caused by an impulse in the ocean.
An underwater earthquake can move mountains of water in mere seconds. The convulsion sends shockwaves surging across the ocean. As the impulses race toward land, the water is forced upward by the rising seafloor. At landfall, the tsunami's waves can tower above buildings and trees. On April 1st, 1946, people of the Hawaiian port of Hilo refused to believe they were in the path of just such a monster wave.
In 1946, people took it as an April Fool's joke. In those days, downtown Hilo was filled with businesses and homes that were right along the waterfront. And as the waves struck that area, they demolished the buildings, the homes, the businesses, and there was a tremendous loss of life. And as a result of lack of warning, 159 people died in the Hawaiian Islands, 96 in Hilo alone.
The terrible toll convinced survivors and the U.S. government of the need for a killer wave alarm system. Today, the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center monitors the ocean around the clock. At the first sign of the upheaval that breeds the giant waves, the Warning Center issues an urgent alert. Tsunamis can hit almost any coastline, but the Pacific to the threat, Japan has built walls. Nearly 2,000 miles of concrete, stone, and steel have turned some of the most vulnerable Japanese coastline into a fortress against the sea. But when the truly great waves come, there is no defense.
Tsunamis can be created by exploding volcanoes, underwater landslides, and earthquakes. There's one very special way of creating a tsunami, and that is if an object from outer space, an asteroid or a large meteorite, crashes into the Earth. And chances are, of course, it'll crash into the ocean. And that would create an enormous tsunami.
Space. What we think of as endless and empty is in fact a very crowded and dangerous place. There is no doubt our home, our planet, is a target. Asteroids and comets have bombarded Earth since the dawn of time. The evidence is impossible to overlook. This mile-wide crater in Arizona is the explosive scar left by a chunk of rock from outer space. Its impact, some 50,000 years ago, must have killed every trace of life for hundreds of miles. Small meteors graze our planet with alarming frequency. In 1992, this fireball streaked over New York and Pennsylvania. With concern over the threat rising, NASA has tracked every hit over the last decade. There have been 250, one every 2 weeks. In 1993, astronomers discovered a string of comets on a crash course for Jupiter. Stargazers around the world watched transfixed as this astronomical freight train slammed into the giant planet at 140,000 miles an hour. The largest impact threw up a giant fireball and a black cloud bigger than the Earth. Had it hit the Earth, the explosion would have released more energy than every atomic bomb ever made. Thousands of large asteroids regularly fly straight through Earth's orbit. It's only a matter of time till one scores a direct hit. A giant asteroid strike would be the ultimate disaster. It would spawn tempests of fire and lightning, immeasurable tsunamis, endless earthquakes and eruptions. The nightmares we already face in nature offer a preview of this doomsday scenario. And for a taste of hell on Earth, you need search no further than our planet's mountains of fire. Its powers are godlike, to blot out the sun, to raise mountains, or destroy them. Little wonder they have been worshipped by mankind throughout history. Kilauea in Hawaii was said to be the home of Pele, the goddess of fire. The mountain Mexicans call El Popo was sacred to the ancient Aztecs. Despite volcanoes' devastating power, men have built their homes in the mountains' shadows around the world, from Japan to the Yucatan, from Iceland to Italy. Volcano in Europe rises out of densely populated eastern Sicily. Mankind has studied Etna's eruptions for centuries. Etna has spewed fire and destruction throughout recorded history. Her most devastating attack was in 1669, a searing tide of lava that buried the city of Catania and a dozen other towns on its unstoppable march to the sea. 20,000 people died. Today, the volcano still looms over Catania, Sicily's second largest city. Another cataclysmic eruption is not a matter of what if, but when. Despite the ever-present threat, over 250,000 Sicilians live, work, and play in the heart of the danger zone. For those who live under constant threat from the fires of the underworld, turning to heaven for help is perfectly natural. History has only reinforced their faith in miraculous intervention. In the terrible eruption of 1669, a chapel in the village of Nicolosi was buried beneath 20 feet of molten rock. But down these steps, a miracle occurred. The lava had engulfed the town's treasured statue of the Madonna. Nearly 40 years later, a local nun was seized by a vision of the Madonna untouched by the burning tide. Inspired by her faith, the townspeople chipped away at the rock until they found a natural chamber. There, just as the nun had foretold, stood the painted marble statue, undamaged by the searing volcanic assault. Ever since, the Madonna has watched over Nicolosi from a new chapel on the mountainside. But faith is not mankind's only defense against volcanoes. Today, science leads the fight. Among the experts at the Italian Institute of Volcanology in Catania is geologist Mauro Cotelli.
When I leave for Etna, I feel a little excitement. For me, it's pretty much a habit to go, but of course, there could be something new, something exciting, something I've never seen.
Mauro's daily commute takes him 3,000 meters up and past lava flows ancient and new, souvenirs of Etna's awesome power. It's a sobering trip, even for this volcano lover. Preventing death and devastation is every volcanologist's ultimate goal. But the force that drives them to the crater's rim is an obsession with the unknown.
As a volcanologist, my job is to help understand how volcanoes work. It's not possible to predict when an explosion is going to happen. It's only possible to try to understand how it works, so we can tell if we are close to a great eruption or not.
Despite all the tools of modern science, volcanologists like Mauro Cotelli can only imagine the inferno that lurks beneath the cauldron of Etna. At the end of a dormant lava tube, deep beneath the base of the mountain, lies a lake of seething magma. When the boiling reservoir overheats and the pressure becomes too great, the magma surges. A fiery tide blasts through lava tubes and shattered rock until the eruption explodes to the surface. Professionals like Mauro know the danger, but Etna draws observers from all over the world. Many have little idea of the risks they face. In 1991, Mauro watched in horror as a group of Czech schoolboys lingered just below the volcano's mouth, transfixed by a hail of lava bombs, searing projectiles, some the size of a small car.
They were crazy. They didn't understand a thing, and they continued watching the show as though they were at the movies. But between the movie theater and a real volcano, there's quite a difference.
There's no guarantee of safety on a volcano. But for curious tourists, the best insurance is a guide who knows the mountain intimately. Orazio Consoli has been climbing Etna since he was 7.
One falls in love with Etna the way one falls in love with a woman, really. This has been my greatest passion.
Experience has taught him that the mountain shows no mercy.
Yes, you're afraid sometimes, especially when you are up with a group of people. It's an active volcano. You never know what it can do. Because a stronger explosion can hit someone. It happened in 1979, an explosion from the central crater. There were 9 dead, 23 seriously wounded. That was the most painful thing that I have experienced on Etna.
In December of 1991, the volcano unleashed an eruption that would last 6 months. Dead in the path of the lava stood the town of Zaffarana. Every effort was made to stem the deadly flow. Emergency crews dug a huge pit and built an earthen dam nearly 70 feet high to hold back the superheated molten rock. But by mid-April, Etna had overwhelmed these defenses. The Italian army and the U.S. Marines took the battle to the air. They bombarded the lava ducts with concrete blocks and high explosives. The unprecedented attack did divert one arm of the flow. But still, the river of fire crept ever closer to town, forcing the people of Zaffarana to turn to a higher protector. Once again, faith seemed to work wonders in the face of the hellish assault. At one house, the lava stopped only inches from the ancient stone walls.
It happened here. The lava was coming down. So we took the Madonna, we carried her to where that cherry tree is, and that's where the lava stopped.
Since then, each spring the people of Zaffarana celebrate their town's miraculous deliverance from a molten tomb. But neither faith nor science can rescue those in the path of a major cataclysm. Just 300 miles to the north of Etna lie the ruins of Pompeii, an entire city buried without warning by the explosion of Mount Vesuvius in the year 79 AD. In 1815, the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia left over 90,000 people dead. Endless clouds of ash blocked out sunlight around the globe, leading to a year without summer. More recently, the unexpected violence of Mount St. Helens spread destruction on a scale unseen in North America for centuries. And in the Caribbean, the tropical paradise of Montserrat has been made a living hell by the gases and ash spewed out by the Soufriere Hills. Back in Sicily, Mount Etna is kept under round-the-clock observation. Any threatening activity is reported by instruments tied to the volcano observatory. The lab stands on the front line. The last observatory here was swallowed by lava in 1979. In tunnels beneath the observatory, a web of sensors monitors even the slightest vibration. While these alarms can't stop an eruption, any warning can help save lives.
I think that Etna will erupt again in a very, very damaging way.
rispetto a qualche secolo fa, ma anche rispetto a qualche anno fa,
But compared to even a few years ago, we are in a position to understand much better when we are getting closer to a destructive phenomenon.
Volcanoes trumpet danger in a shower of fire. But at the other end of the spectrum, there is a quieter, stealthier hazard. Ice, one of nature's most basic substances. Ordinary water, made solid by the cold. Beautiful, abundant, and deadly. Adrift in busy shipping lanes, every iceberg is a potential killer. The only way to fight disaster is to plunge into the most threatening waters and track the danger. With thousands of icebergs on the loose and thousands of ships at risk, the job calls for an international effort, a coordinated attack by sea and by air, on a battlefield spread across 500,000 square miles of frigid water. The crushing force of pack ice has bedeviled ships in Arctic waters for centuries. Further south, what sailors fear is not the vice-like grip of the pack, but the deadly lone wolves of the sea, icebergs. These million-ton monsters can tower 20 stories above the water. But the real danger lurks below. Nearly 90% of an iceberg's bulk lies hidden beneath the waves. Super compressed ice, harder than steel. More treacherous still are the growlers. Almost invisible to radar, these baby bergs can batter a ship with crippling force. The west coast of Greenland is the birthplace of the North Atlantic bergs. Each year, huge blocks of ice shear off or calve from the glaciers that blanket Greenland. Caught in the grip of the Labrador Current, as many as 1,500 icebergs drift smack into Atlantic shipping lanes every spring. On this superhighway of the seas, an uncontrolled intersection is a disaster waiting to happen. Proof of the berg's deadly passage is marked by the graves of their victims. And no casualty of the ice is remembered with greater sorrow than the liner that was known as Titanic. As she steamed south of Newfoundland on April 14, 1912, the Titanic was believed to be unsinkable. Late that night, the ship's passengers, captain, and crew discovered just how false their faith had been. More than 1,500 men, women, and children went down with the Titanic. The news shocked the world and continues to capture imaginations today. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, a trio of graveyards hold the remains of some of the victims. Others are buried at sea, over 2 miles deep. In the aftermath, an answer to the frozen threat was born.
The United States Coast Guard is back at the important peacetime job of hunting icebergs in northern waters.
In 1914, in direct response to the Titanic, the International Ice Patrol took to the waves. Ever since, the U.S. Coast Guard has led the effort, prowling the North Atlantic for killer bergs. After World War II, the Ice Patrol began searching by air as well as by sea. Their mission, to save lives and property. Their method, plot the ever-shifting boundary between safe and dangerous waters. Radar extends the crew's vision 27 miles to each side. Satellite tracking nails down iceberg positions within inches. But for all the high-tech tools at their disposal, the Ice Patrol still depends on old-fashioned human observation.
Hey, Rusty, we need your eyes here. I've got a cloud banker in front of me right now.
The men who scour the ocean for bergs are called ice picks. Trained observers, they keep careful notes of every iceberg's size and shape. Keeping tabs on the bergs means tracking the currents. And to help with that job, the Ice Patrol tosses out a specialized instrument package to monitor the icy waters.
Drops ready. Drops away.
And the ships that sail these seas have other guardians besides the flying monitors of the Ice Patrol. Whenever sea ice threatens the shipping lanes, icebreakers like the Canadian Coast Guard's Henry Larson pick up the fight.
Starboard 20, come 330. 330. 0 is 5.
The Henry Larson is a floating bulldozer. 13,000 tons propelled by 17,000 horsepower give the breaker the ability to crash through ice 30 feet thick. To broaden her scope, the Larson even carries her own Air Force.
Okay, good morning, Gary. Just to make sure, are you ready to copy the ice message, over?
The bird's eye view from the Coast Guard chopper fills in the missing pieces of the icy puzzle.
For your information, off Cape Phil, the main ice
The icebreaker's flying lookout also comes in handy on search and rescue missions. A desperate SOS sends the Larson hours out of her way.
9-10 plus of ice.
At the edge of the ice pack, a fishing boat drifts, its rudder crippled by ice. Unable to navigate, she's a sitting duck for growlers and runs the risk of getting crushed by pack ice. With daylight fading, it's a race against time. Safe in tow, the fishing boat bobs in the breaker's wake while the mothership knifes through the ice, heading for home. In the air 500 miles to the east, the International Ice Patrol approaches its own solemn rendezvous. Each year, one flight in mid-April marks a special anniversary for the patrol. At a nameless spot above the featureless sea, the crew prepare to perform a simple ceremony. Latitude 41 degrees north, longitude 50 degrees west. The very waters where the Titanic met her fate.
On the aircraft, it is with great respect and reverence that the United States Coast Guard and the Titanic Historical Society commemorate the 85th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. Today, April 11th, 1997, we cast these wreaths into the ocean where the Titanic struck an iceberg and sank with a loss of more than 1,500 lives.
Since the birth of the patrol in 1914, not a single ship has been lost to the bergs on their watch. Still, so long as ships sail through Arctic waters, eternal vigilance remains the only defense against these floating mountains of ice. On other mountains far from the polar seas, ice and snow can pose an even greater peril. The Swiss Alps, a paradise with jagged edges. For some, it's a winter playground. But this alpine terrain has hidden dangers. One February afternoon, Catherine Perret and Ivo Weimann were out skiing.
This is an area we are very familiar with. We never thought there was any danger.
But then we noticed that as the hills got steeper, the snow wasn't holding. At that point, we knew that something wasn't the way it should be.
High up in the hills, it began. And before they heard anything, it was upon them.
I turned around to see where Catherine was, and there was no trace, nothing.
Catherine!
Fearing the worst, Ivo decided to go for help, not knowing Catherine's fate. In fact, she had been buried alive. Most victims die if they aren't found within the first half hour. And the hours were slipping by.
I had two options, either to keep panicking and therefore die, or else work with the little bit I had and maybe have a chance.
One of Catherine's hands was free, but as she scratched the snow, she started to lose hope.
I told myself, you'll never make it. You're going to die now.
Finally, she could reach through the surface, and she heard a noise.
You don't believe it. There have been too many emotions, too much fear, too much hope, too much despair before that. It's overwhelming.
As the rescuers dug down, they were amazed to find that she was still alive after 5 hours buried in the snow. Catherine was lucky. She came face to face with one of the deadliest forces in nature and survived. Others have not been so fortunate. They call it the White Death. All over the world, from New Zealand to Nepal, avalanches strike suddenly and without warning. Steep slopes and heavy snow are the first ingredients in a recipe for tragedy. The snowpack on a mountainside gathers in layers, and the strength of each layer depends on temperature, wind, the angle of the slope. When a strong layer sits on top of a weaker one, any sudden change or disturbance can trigger a slide. A great wave or slab of snow can rumble downhill with tons of force. Around the globe, as many as 1 million avalanches fall every year. And each year, the White Death claims hundreds of victims. When the snows melted in Nepal in 1996, it was revealed that scores had died in one of the worst winters on record. But of all the countries pounded by avalanches, Switzerland is among the hardest hit. It looks like a movie set, serene and calm. But these hills are alive. Spring and summer hide a secret. Because when fall and winter arrive, so do the snows and the avalanches. Some 17,000 a year. The record of snowslides here goes back to the 3rd century BC, when Hannibal crossed the Alps. For 2,200 years, it's been a battle of man versus the avalanche. But recently the problem has grown as more people have chosen to move up into the mountains. In Switzerland, thousands of residents live in towns within the so-called red zones. One such village is Andermatt. In the 1950s, Switzerland was pounded by an epidemic of avalanches. Andermatt was among the hardest hit. And yet, over the coming decades, more and more people came to live and play there, transforming Andermatt into a major resort destination, despite the potential menace. Walter Huber was 16 in 1975. His family had been living in this house for years. Little did they know that disaster was looming just above them on the hillside. When the snows came that winter, the house was engulfed.
In one day and one night, we had an accumulation of 6 feet of new snow, and my sister and I went out to shovel the path in front of the house. When I turned around, I saw a cloud of powdered snow, and at that moment it was clear to me it was an avalanche. There was a big bang coming from the other side of the house, and all the windows broke from the pressure. And then the chaos with the trees and the snow. And my sister, who was nowhere to be found.
In that one terrible moment, his sister Rita's life was snuffed out. In spite of the Huber family's tragic loss, they never left. Today, more than 20 years later, Walter and his family still live in the same house. Day in, day out, his children still walk the very same path where his sister died. There are many such tragedies around the globe. When disaster strikes, the world looks to one place above all for answers: the town of Davos. The Swiss Federal Avalanche Institute. The Institute is the world's leading authority on snow and all things avalanche related. And while nothing will stop an avalanche, people have found ways to dissipate its energy. Following the great avalanches of the 1950s, Switzerland began building these barriers to protect its towns. In the past 4 decades, they have erected some 300 miles of barricades, about 1.5 times the width of the entire country. While it's possible to protect towns, it's harder to safeguard individual skiers when they head off the beaten path. Silent and powerful, avalanches tumble down to pick off many an unsuspecting backcountry sportsman. The Swiss are constantly researching the best ways to hunt for avalanche victims. Some are tried and true methods that have been used for hundreds of years. Search dogs, shovels, probes. The Institute trains ski patrols in their application. But other methods are more high-tech, more modern. Like a beeper. A small radio transmitter given to each skier. The transmitters can also be switched to receive the signal and close in on the victim. Around the world, from Vail, Colorado to Nagaro, Japan, these beepers are becoming standard issue for backcountry skiers. But these are all just ways to respond when an avalanche strikes. Sometimes you have to take action earlier. Sometimes you have to create avalanches in order to prevent them. And that's the job of the Davos Mountain Patrol. By setting off controlled avalanches, the patrol strikes first, before nature turns deadly. But in the fight against avalanches, nature itself provides the perfect defense: trees. Since the Middle Ages, the people of Switzerland have been planting trees to protect their towns. All the work that's being done in Davos has emphasized one thing: that it's these surprisingly low-tech solutions and quiet heroes who can make all the difference. The simple group of trees you can barely see in summer provides the essential protection that allows a town like Andermatt to exist. For summer will turn to winter, the snows will build, and the trees will stand as a wedge against nature's rage. Against the threat that always returns. When winter gives way to spring, another danger can cascade down from the mountains. All it takes is melting snowpack, heavy rains. Swollen rivers become raging torrents, destroying villages and towns in Canada, Italy, China, leaving millions homeless and thousands dead. Buildings, cities, entire lives washed away and carried downstream. In the first few days of 1997, disaster struck the city of Sacramento, California. On New Year's Day, the rains started and they didn't stop. A 3-day storm dumped a record downpour, 2 to 3 feet. The dams couldn't hold back the raging waters. Overburdened, the levees began to give way. Those who lived nearby would barely escape. As the floodwaters mounted, they swept away everything in their path. Highways turned into waterways, and the land was swallowed up. In the flooding, 120,000 people were forced out of their homes. Farms, houses, and crops were destroyed. The damage would reach an estimated $2 billion, making it the most costly deluge in California history.
Oh, we've lost everything we have, but I was 2 minutes, I could have not been here, so I feel real lucky.
The city was in a state of emergency for days. Many neighborhoods were destroyed. But when the rain stopped, the threat did not end. The waterways were now swollen and powerful, and levees up and down the river were being washed away. Wherever people build in the floodplains, from Holland to China, they erect levees and dikes, trying to force swollen rivers into narrower channels. But often, this solution only makes the problem worse, raising the water to levels that cannot be held back. And as flood control experts say, there are only 2 kinds of levees, those that have broken and those that will. That's what was happening in Northern California. This part of the Central Valley was a web of rivers and waterways, controlled by more than 5,000 miles of levees. and one by one, the levees began to collapse. The waters rose and spread out across 300 square miles. People were still evacuating, saving what they could. And humans were not the only ones at risk. One story played out live on TV. Rodeo, a 4-year-old border collie, had been washed onto the roof of his house. His owner, Jan Thompson, pleaded for aid from the local television station.
We've got to help him. He's worked so hard to live. He has to get down from there.
With the waters surging higher, Channel 3 sent out a chopper to rescue the trapped dog.
They risked their lives to get my dog. But they got him by the collar, and he lunged into the helicopter, and they slammed the door and took off as fast as they could. And the whole newsroom had a big burst of cheers that Rodeo was okay.
Guy, how are you doing? How you doing? How you doing?
Rodeo was one of the lucky ones. For many others, there would be no last-minute heroics. Humans were also forced to scramble to safety. Whole families took to their rooftops. For them, the disaster seemed to be unfolding in slow motion. That's often the way with floods, as the water rises slowly and steadily. Of course, some floods happen fast. They're called flash floods, water's deadliest incarnation. They can strike anywhere there are brief, intense rains and narrow waterways. For Americans, the touchstone had always been the Johnstown, Pennsylvania flood. In May of 1889, heavy rains led to the collapse of a 70-foot earthen dam, and a liquid avalanche crushed the city. The entire downtown was washed away in less than 10 minutes. Through the 1920s and 30s, the rains came once more, and Johnstown was inundated again and again. These floods killed thousands, yet even they were small indeed compared to the ones that struck China. All through the early 1900s, great torrents swept across the Yangtze Valley. One of the most catastrophic floods of our century occurred in 1931, when the Yangtze and Huang Ho jumped their banks and killed 225,000 people. China's landscape, great rivers crashing down onto broad plains, continues to be a recipe for disaster. Historically, floods come to the same areas over and over. The floodplains are the river's domain. It's a simple matter of topography, the shape of the land, and the land knows no compassion. In 1997, the people of Northern California were not alone in rediscovering this fact of life. In Poland, Germany, and the Czech Republic, storm-swollen rivers spilled over their banks, killing more than 100 people, leaving hundreds of thousands homeless. Yet, wherever the flood waters strike, Europe, North America, China, The battle against the raging tide always seems to bring out the best in people. Back in Sacramento, California, J.J. Moore of the Army National Guard wasn't supposed to be a hero. At least, that's what his wife told him.
She told me, when you go, don't be a hero. That's the last thing she asked me. And I said, okay, I promise we'll be safe.
But as the disaster unfolded, J.J. Moore was called into action, dangling from a Black Hawk rescue copter. On the Cosumnes River, the waters were rising up to 12 feet high, and right in the middle was a stranded motorist.
I could see the guy. He was really scared, really frantic, and I could see that he was going to jump at me. So when we got to him, I'm trying to tell him, don't jump, stay right there.
Surrounded by trees and barbed wire, J.J. tried to swing his charge to dry land. But he was slipping away. One last effort. For this lucky motorist, it was a narrow escape. While many would mourn their losses to the river, at least they had escaped with their lives. For so long as people live on the floodplains, there is always the danger that life-giving rains will turn peaceful rivers into deadly torrents. Yet when the rains refuse to fall, nature can unleash storms of another kind. It's not just water that can drown a town. So too can sand or dust. A million tiny grains born on the wind. It was called Black Sunday. On April 14th, 1935, a dark blizzard struck America's Great Plains, rolling across the land. It churned in from Colorado, through Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas. A huge dust storm with winds of up to 60 miles an hour. Swallowing towns in total darkness. A darkness that would turn the heart of a nation into a dust bowl. Rain is the lifeblood of the planet. But when the rains stop, trouble begins. In drought-stricken lands, the soil turns to dust. When the winds blow, a chain reaction begins. And a black roller is born. A terrible vortex breaking like a dark wave over the land. A large dust storm can be 300 miles in diameter and carry 100 million tons of soil into the air. And they can strike almost any continent on Earth. This was the scene in Melbourne, Australia in 1983, after a particularly dry summer.
Rail and road traffic was thrown into chaos, and the city's 3 airports closed as the dust swirled in choking clouds. Much of the land denuded of soil this summer won't recover completely in this generation, if ever.
All across Africa, Australia, and the Americas, these clouds of dust and sand have left their mark. Some are so massive, they can even be seen from outer space, blanketing the Earth, covering the sky. But as suffocating as sand and dust storms can be, nothing matches the deadly potential of fire. Flame and smoke, and the terrible beauty of the blaze.
No, it's a living and breathing thing.
It sounds like a train's coming just real quick, like a whoosh.
Sparks are flying everywhere, and you don't realize how panicked you're going to be.
It's a deadly combination of heat, fuel, and oxygen. add a spark, and it comes to life. This is not just any fire, it's wildfire. When flames go rampaging across the countryside, burning out of control. All around the world, the conditions that create the monster wildfires are the same. Dry land and vegetation, with too much wind and not enough water. When summer approaches, it turns parched, brown, a tinderbox. Across the planet, millions live in these high-risk fire regions. Drought has made Australia the world's most fire-prone country. In 1994, Sydney, Australia was hit by a monster blaze. It would sweep across nearly 1.5 million acres. In Greece, the plants of the arid countryside can burst into flame. But if any one area has had more than its share of wildfire, it is California. The problem isn't just fire, it's people. Residential development in what was once dry scrubland has thrust homes and families into the heart of the hottest wildfire zone in the United States. Nearly 2,000 fires strike each year. In October of 1991, Northern California was devastated when a dry east wind blew embers across Oakland and the hills of Berkeley. The flames spread quickly from wilderness to suburbia, and sheer panic set in.
All right. Evacuation. Is it on the right channel? Yeah.
At moments, both Australia and Oakland would confront the most terrible phenomenon of all: a firestorm. An intense whirlwind of flame. It's what happens when fire feeds on fire and a blaze goes ballistic. Convection currents become so strong, the inferno creates its own weather patterns. A firestorm can be 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit and move at 100 miles an hour. It's an explosive blast of pure flame. In 1989, Jim Scale set out to fight a small fire and got caught in the middle of a firestorm. In this video, he was in the next to last truck heading south on Route 395 when the unthinkable happened.
You know, the footage in The Wizard of Oz when the house is tossed up and thrown around in there, that's exactly what it was like, except for with fire embers and the whole bushes being tossed around with you.
A wall of flame, 120 feet high, shot across the highway at 100 miles an hour. Scales, in the truck on the left, found himself engulfed in the middle of a firestorm.
It was there in seconds. Came across the highway on us. I had second degree over my entire face, and you know, your thought is, do I have a nose still? Do I have an ear still? What have I done? Where do we go from here? Who's going to take care of my family? All that type of stuff runs through your mind. We were able to get up to the highway. We were given first aid there by the rest of the strike team. We have a saying around our station. We call it shaking hands with the devil. As I'm living proof. Sometimes you don't turn your back on the devil, and that's quite obvious.
In the fight against wildfires, surprisingly little has changed over the last few decades. It remains hand-to-hand combat with a deadly killer. Those who dare to walk among the flames still use much of the same basic equipment: hoses, axes, and pumper trucks churning out gallons of water to fight the blaze. And the battle plan is still the same as well. They confront it with water, clear-cut brush, even set small fires to burn out a path and stop the progress of the flame. Recently, Southern California unveiled the newest tactical weapon in the battle against wildfires. A rapid deployment force called Helitack, designed to be first on the fire lines. Start with a modified military chopper, capable of speeding to the scene at 140 miles per hour. Add a Bambi bucket, able to carry 300 gallons of water to the heart of the fire. Top it off with a team of men ready and willing to fly into hell at a moment's notice. The job demands that they face the fire day after day, fighting over 100 blazes a year. More than a few have fallen in the line of duty. What kind of men take on this death-defying challenge? They're convicts, every man, non-violent offenders from the prisons of California. In 1996, the Helitack team would be put to the test as never before. In October, the entire state of California seemed to be on fire. In the hills outside of San Diego, the community of Carlsbad was all but surrounded by flame. Firemen responded to the call, driving into the inferno. It was a full-scale war as the blaze burned out of control, unstoppable. Every weapon in the arsenal was called in. More than 1,000 firefighters, tankers dropping fire retardant. With 8,700 acres bursting into flame, the Helitack team was called into action. On the ground and in the air, they battled the blaze all day and into the night.
Your adrenaline starts pumping, you know, and you just think you got to do something, just do it and just get out of here.
Devours property, land, homes, whatever it's in its way, you know, that's fuel. And we have to stop it, you know, it's a monster.
After 2.5 days, they finally started to beat the fire back.
We stopped it in some places, and some places it overran us, you know, like, you know, most firefighters know that a fire, it has a mind of its own. Been working here like 3 days now, you know, just doing the best we can to eliminate this monster. It's a monster. I mean, it's devastating.
By the 4th day, they had succeeded in putting out the blaze. The squad had saved some 200 homes. Still, they couldn't save them all. 101 houses were destroyed in this once affluent San Diego suburb. Tragedy hit home for people like Nancy and James Weiss.
We just took photographs. I took my grandmother's quilt. My son took his school books and his college applications. That was it. You know, didn't know what to do. Just knew that there was no way that this was going to survive. 26 years of memories in a house.
But I think it was cookware. A lot of
it. It's pieces of your life that, you no longer have. This is like nothing you can imagine, though.
The few whose homes escaped the blaze knew exactly whom to thank.
The fire department saved this house. They got here when they had something to work with. I think they're more than heroes because, I mean, You know, usually when you read about heroes, it's somebody who is in a situation that happens while they're there. I mean, these guys walk into it.
Some might say it takes a band of criminals to walk into hell and back, but in the heat of the fire, these men have been transformed from convicts into heroes.
We even heard cheers when we unloaded on the helicopter. I remember reading a little note from some little girl that said, "Thank you, Mr. Fireman. If you wasn't here, something bad would happen." And I mean, it just touched my heart, you know, because we all have kids, and just to, you know, to know that a little girl has that kind of love in it gives you extra plus.
Nature's destructive power can overwhelm all our efforts to resist. Still, that doesn't stop men and women from plunging into the fire or trying to hold back the tide. Sometimes, though, all we can do is watch and wonder at the power and fury of nature's rage.